Welcome, fellow travelers of infinite realities, to a journey through the profound philosophical depths hidden beneath Rick and Morty's interdimensional chaos. Tonight, we explore the cosmic questions that haunt every portal jump and every family dinner. Questions about meaning, mortality, and our place in an indifferent universe. Settle in comfortably as we drift through the existential landscape of a show that uses science fiction horror to examine the deepest truths about human existence. Let these philosophical meditations wash over you like cosmic background radiation, carrying you toward peaceful rest while we uncover the beautiful absurdity of consciousness in an infinite multiverse. The cosmic horror that permeates every dimension Rick Sanchez visits finds its philosophical roots in the literary tradition established by Howard Phillips Lovecraft, a writer whose imagination conjured terrors that transcended simple monster stories to explore the fundamental inadequacy of human consciousness when confronted with the true nature of reality. Lovecraft understood that the most profound horror comes not from things that want to hurt us, but from the recognition that we exist in a universe so vast and alien that our very existence becomes a kind of cosmic accident, a brief flicker of awareness in an endless expanse of indifferent space and time. Rick and Morty embraces this Lovecraftian vision with both reverence and dark humor, transforming the existential dread of cosmic insignificance into a source of both terror and laughter that speaks to our contemporary anxieties about meaning and purpose in an age of scientific materialism. The show's opening sequence itself pays visual homage to Lovecraft's most famous creation, the tentacled entity Cthulhu, suggesting that the adventures we are about to witness will take us into territories where human reason and emotion prove inadequate tools for comprehension or survival. The tradition of cosmic horror that Lovecraft pioneered differs fundamentally from conventional horror narratives that rely on familiar threats like death, disease, or human cruelty. Cosmic horror confronts us instead with the possibility that reality itself is structured in ways that make human welfare and human understanding irrelevant considerations in the broader scheme of existence. The monsters in Lovecraft's stories are terrifying not because they are evil in any sense that humans can comprehend, but because they represent forces and intelligences so alien that our normal categories of thought and morality simply do not apply to them. This philosophical framework proves perfectly suited to Rick and Morty's exploration of infinite dimensions and alternate realities, where the normal human assumption that our particular version of existence matters in some cosmic sense is constantly challenged by encounters with beings and phenomena that operate according to entirely different principles. The portal gun that enables Rick's adventures serves as more than just a plot device. It functions as a philosophical instrument that forces characters and viewers alike to confront the uncomfortable possibility that our reality is just one arbitrary configuration among infinite alternatives. The Cromulons who appear in the episode Get Swifty exemplify this cosmic horror aesthetic while simultaneously demonstrating how Rick and Morty transforms existential terror into absurdist comedy. These giant floating heads that approach Earth with casual indifference to the chaos their presence creates represent exactly the kind of cosmic entities that populate Lovecraft's fiction, beings whose motivations and capabilities are so far beyond human understanding that attempting to negotiate with them or resist them becomes exercises in futility. The gravitational effects that the Cromulons' presence has on Earth's ecosystem serve as physical manifestation of the psychological disruption that cosmic horror inflicts on human consciousness. Just as the giant heads distort the planet's natural order through their sheer mass and alien presence, the recognition of our cosmic insignificance distorts our normal frameworks for understanding meaning, morality, and purpose. The environmental disasters that follow their arrival mirror the philosophical disasters that result from genuinely accepting the implications of living in an infinite universe where human welfare is not a primary consideration. The demand that Earth show me what you got transforms the entire planet into an entertainment venue for beings whose scale of existence makes human civilization appear as inconsequential as an ant colony might appear to human observers. This reduction of human achievement and aspiration to mere spectacle for cosmic entities reflects contemporary philosopher Eugene Thacker's concept of cosmic pessimism, the recognition that the universe as it actually exists is absolutely unhuman and indifferent to the hopes, desires, and struggles of human individuals and groups. The cult that develops to worship the Cromulons represents a psychologically realistic response to encountering forces that exceed human comprehension and control. When confronted with evidence of our cosmic insignificance, some humans naturally attempt to find meaning and security by aligning themselves with the superior powers that threaten them. The religious imagery and language that surrounds the Cromulon worship serves as commentary on how traditional religious frameworks often function as psychological defenses against existential anxiety about human vulnerability and mortality. Rick's knowledge that the Cromulons are conducting an intergalactic talent show demonstrates both his superior understanding of cosmic realities and the absurdist humor that emerges when vast philosophical questions are resolved through mundane explanations. The revelation that Earth's potential destruction results not from cosmic malevolence or divine judgment, but from the entertainment preferences of alien television producers, transforms existential terror into dark comedy, while preserving the essential insight that human welfare depends on forces entirely beyond human influence or understanding. The song that Rick and Morty create to satisfy the Cromulons' demands, Get Swifty, represents humanity's desperate attempt to prove worthy of continued existence through creative expression that speaks to alien sensibilities. The absurdity of the lyrics and the casual way that Rick approaches this literally life or death performance challenge highlights the fundamental impossibility of meaningful communication between radically different forms of consciousness, while also suggesting that creative expression might represent humanity's most distinctive and valuable contribution to cosmic discourse. The competitive nature of the Cromulon talent show, where multiple planets perform for the right to continue existing, creates a framework where entire civilizations become expendable entertainment for beings whose perspective operates on scales that make individual planets seem as replaceable as television channels. This casual attitude toward planetary destruction reflects the cosmic horror insight that what seems infinitely precious and irreplaceable from a human perspective may appear trivial and disposable from a broader cosmic viewpoint. The other planets that compete alongside Earth in the Cromulon talent show provide glimpses of alternative approaches to the same existential challenge, suggesting that the cosmic horror of insignificance is not unique to human experience, but represents a universal condition that affects all conscious beings when they encounter forces that transcend their normal frameworks for understanding reality. The variety of performances and the different fates that befall competing planets create a sense of cosmic democracy where survival depends not on moral worth or inherent value, but on the arbitrary preferences of entities whose criteria for judgment remain forever alien and incomprehensible. Rick's casual attitude toward the Cromulon threat and his confidence in his ability to manipulate cosmic forces reflects his evolution into something approaching a cosmic entity himself through his mastery of interdimensional technology and his accumulated knowledge of multiversal principles. His ability to navigate cosmic horror scenarios with relative ease suggests that prolonged exposure to the true nature of reality has transformed him into something that is no longer entirely human, someone who can participate in cosmic scale events without experiencing the existential terror that such encounters would normally provoke. The president's willingness to defer to Rick's expertise in handling the Cromulon crisis reflects the broader human tendency to rely on scientific and technological solutions when confronted with problems that exceed normal human capabilities. However, the show suggests that even advanced scientific knowledge provides only partial protection against cosmic horror, since understanding the mechanisms behind alien threats does not eliminate the fundamental reality of human vulnerability and dependence on forces beyond human control. The resolution of the Cromulon episode, where Earth's performance proves adequate to ensure the planet's survival, provides temporary relief from existential anxiety while preserving the underlying cosmic horror insight that human existence remains contingent on factors that have nothing to do with human virtue, achievement, or inherent worth. The victory feels arbitrary rather than earned, emphasizing that survival in a cosmic horror universe depends more on luck and circumstance than on human agency or moral development. The broader implications of the Cromulon encounter extend beyond the immediate threat to Earth's survival to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, creativity, and meaning in a universe where advanced civilizations can be eliminated casually by entities whose motivations remain completely opaque. The episode suggests that creative expression, represented by music, performance, and artistic creation, might represent the closest thing to universal communication between different forms of consciousness, while simultaneously acknowledging that such communication remains imperfect and unreliable. The cosmic horror elements in Rick and Morty serve not only as sources of adventure and conflict, but also as philosophical instruments that force characters and viewers to confront questions about meaning, purpose, and value that are normally avoided through the comfortable routines of everyday existence. Each encounter with cosmic entities or interdimensional phenomena functions as a thought experiment that challenges normal human assumptions about the significance of individual choices and relationships. The show's treatment of cosmic horror reflects contemporary anxieties about humanity's place in an increasingly complex and interconnected universe where traditional sources of meaning and identity, religion, nationalism, family, community, seem inadequate to address the scale and complexity of global and cosmic challenges. The portal gun that enables Rick's adventures serves as a metaphor for the way that modern technology and scientific knowledge expose us to realities that exceed our emotional and psychological capacity for comfortable comprehension. The humor that Rick and Morty extracts from cosmic horror scenarios serves not to diminish the philosophical seriousness of existential questions, but rather to suggest that laughter might represent one of the few psychologically sustainable responses to recognizing our cosmic insignificance. The show implies that taking cosmic horror too seriously leads to paralysis and despair, while completely ignoring it results in dangerous complacency and self-deception. The visual and narrative homages to Lovecraft that appear throughout Rick and Morty demonstrate the creator's sophisticated understanding of cosmic horror as both a literary genre and a philosophical framework for addressing contemporary concerns about meaning and purpose. In an age of scientific materialism, the tentacled monsters, ancient entities, and incomprehensible geometries that populate the show's background serve as constant reminders that the universe contains more mystery and terror than human consciousness can comfortably accommodate. As we drift deeper into contemplation of these cosmic horror themes, we begin to understand how Rick and Morty uses the tradition established by Lovecraft to explore questions that remain as relevant today as they were when cosmic horror first emerged as a literary movement. The fundamental insight that reality might be structured in ways that make human welfare irrelevant continues to challenge contemporary assumptions about progress, meaning, and the ultimate significance of human civilization in the broader cosmic context. The philosophical earthquake that shakes the foundation of individual identity and personal significance in Rick and Morty emerges most powerfully through the show's casual treatment of infinite realities and alternate dimensions, where the discovery that countless versions of yourself exist across the multiverse transforms questions of uniqueness and meaning from abstract philosophical puzzles into immediate psychological crises that demand practical responses from characters who must continue functioning despite learning that their particular existence is mathematically insignificant. The moment when Rick and Morty bury their own corpses and assume the identities of their deceased alternate selves marks one of the most psychologically devastating revelations in the series, forcing both characters and viewers to confront the reality that personal identity, memory, and continuity of experience, the fundamental building blocks of human selfhood, can be disrupted, replaced, and reconstituted without eliminating the essential core of who we are, or perhaps more disturbingly, proving that there was never an essential core to begin with. Morty's traumatic response to burying his own dead body reflects the normal human psychological resistance to accepting evidence that challenges our basic assumptions about the uniqueness and irreplaceability of individual existence. The horror he experiences is not simply about confronting mortality, which humans have always understood intellectually, but about recognizing that his specific memories, relationships, and accumulated experiences exist in countless variations across infinite dimensions, making his particular version of consciousness appear arbitrary rather than precious or meaningful. The casual efficiency with which Rick handles their dimensional transition reveals how prolonged exposure to multiversal realities has eroded his capacity for the kind of psychological attachment to particular versions of existence that makes normal human emotional life possible. His ability to treat their deaths and replacements as minor inconveniences rather than existential catastrophes demonstrates the way that infinite knowledge can become a form of emotional anesthesia that protects against suffering while also eliminating the possibility of genuine joy or meaningful connection. The mathematical reality of infinite dimensions creates a philosophical framework where every possible variation of every person exists simultaneously across countless realities, making individual choices and achievements appear cosmically redundant, since every alternative decision is also being made by alternate versions of the same person in parallel universes. This infinite multiplication of possibility transforms human agency from a source of meaning and responsibility into evidence of cosmic determinism, where all outcomes are equally real and equally meaningless. Rick's explanation that they can only replace themselves a few more times before running out of suitable alternate realities provides a darkly comic acknowledgement that even infinity has practical limitations when filtered through the specific requirements of maintaining continuity and avoiding detection by family members who must never learn the truth about their multiple replacements. The casual tone of this revelation masks the profound psychological implications of living with the knowledge that your current relationships are built on deception and substitution rather than authentic shared experience. The family's unknowing acceptance of replacement Rick and Morty highlights the philosophical question of whether relationships are based on essential identity or simply on continuity of behavior and memory. Beth, Jerry, and Summer continue loving and interacting with Rick and Morty exactly as they did before, suggesting either that personal identity is more superficial than we normally assume, or that love and family bonds operate at levels that transcend specific individual consciousness and remain intact across dimensional boundaries. The replacement process creates multiple layers of deception that compound the existential horror of the situation. Not only are Rick and Morty living in a reality that is not originally their own, but they must constantly perform the identities of their dead alternate selves while hiding their knowledge of infinite alternatives from family members who remain blissfully unaware of the cosmic scope of existence. This performance of normalcy in the face of ultimate knowledge creates a form of existential loneliness that exceeds anything available in single reality scenarios. The discovery that countless other Ricks across infinite dimensions have made similar choices about dimensional abandonment and replacement suggests that these seemingly desperate decisions are actually predictable responses to multiversal awareness, reducing Rick's apparent uniqueness and moral flexibility to statistical inevitabilities that play out across countless realities with mechanical regularity. The implication that every possible version of Rick eventually becomes capable of casual family abandonment transforms individual moral failings into cosmic constants. The central finite curve that Rick constructed to isolate all realities where he remains the smartest person in the universe represents perhaps the most psychologically revealing response to the problem of infinite alternatives and the death of uniqueness. Rather than accepting his cosmic insignificance as an inevitable consequence of infinite existence, Rick used his scientific capabilities to create a prison that preserves his illusion of intellectual superiority by eliminating all evidence that contradicts his self-image as the most important person in any reality he chooses to inhabit. The mathematical complexity required to identify and isolate all dimensions where Rick Sanchez maintains intellectual dominance exceeds anything that normal human intelligence should be capable of conceiving, but the project also reveals the fundamental insecurity and psychological fragility that motivates even Rick's most impressive scientific achievements. The central finite curve functions as a cosmic scale security blanket that protects Rick from confronting evidence of his own limitations, while simultaneously imprisoning countless other beings within his carefully curated version of cosmic reality. The billions of Mortys, Beths, Jerrys, and Summers who live within the central finite curve exist as unknowing prisoners in Rick's elaborate defense mechanism against existential anxiety, their entire lives predetermined by his psychological need to remain the most significant person in any universe he might encounter. The casual way that Rick constructed this dimensional barrier demonstrates how quickly superior intelligence can evolve into systematic oppression when combined with unlimited power and fundamental inability to accept evidence that challenges cherished self-concepts. The revelation that Rick has been living within his own philosophical prison while believing himself to be the ultimate expression of scientific freedom and interdimensional mobility creates dramatic irony that extends beyond simple plot development to encompass fundamental questions about self-knowledge, authentic choice, and the relationship between power and wisdom. The man who appears to possess ultimate freedom of movement through infinite realities has actually been limiting himself to a carefully selected subset of dimensions that confirm his preconceptions and protect his ego. The discovery of the central finite curve's existence forces a re-evaluation of every adventure and relationship that Rick has experienced, since beginning his interdimensional travels, since all of his achievements and connections have occurred within an environment that he designed to ensure his continued superiority and significance. The possibility that his relationships with his family and his scientific accomplishments are products of carefully maintained artificial conditions rather than genuine interactions with unrestricted reality adds new layers of deception and self-deception to his already complex psychological profile. The mathematical certainty that infinite realities contain infinite versions of every possible person creates a philosophical framework where traditional concepts of death, loss, and irreplaceable uniqueness become meaningless abstractions that provide comfort only to beings who remain ignorant of the true scope of existence. Knowledge of infinite alternatives transforms grief from a natural response to permanent loss into an irrational attachment to arbitrary particulars that could easily be replaced by functionally identical alternatives from parallel dimensions. The psychological adaptation that Rick has developed to function despite his awareness of infinite alternatives involves a form of compartmentalization that allows him to maintain emotional investments in specific relationships while simultaneously understanding their ultimate replaceability and insignificance. This cognitive dissonance creates internal tensions that manifest as emotional volatility, self-medication through alcohol, and increasing difficulty maintaining consistent moral frameworks across different situations and contexts. The casual way that Rick discusses dimensional abandonment and replacement with Morty reflects his assumption that his grandson will eventually develop similar psychological defenses against the existential implications of multiversal awareness. But Morty's continued emotional responses to their adventures suggest that normal human consciousness may be fundamentally incompatible with full acceptance of infinite alternatives. The tension between Rick's evolutionary adaptation to cosmic knowledge and Morty's persistent humanity creates ongoing conflict that neither scientific explanation nor emotional appeal can resolve satisfactorily. The infinite multiplication of every possible version of consciousness across countless realities creates a universe where individual achievements, moral choices, and personal growth become statistically negligible, since every alternative outcome is simultaneously occurring in parallel dimensions. This cosmic determinism makes traditional concepts of responsibility, praise, and blame appear arbitrary and meaningless, since condemning someone for making harmful choices becomes absurd when infinite versions of the same person are simultaneously making every possible alternative choice. The recognition that infinite realities contain infinite versions of every possible relationship and interaction transforms love, friendship, and family bonds from unique and precious connections into generic patterns that repeat endlessly across dimensional boundaries, with only minor variations in specific details. This understanding challenges the foundation of human emotional life by suggesting that the people we love are replaceable components in cosmic patterns rather than irreplaceable individuals whose specific existence justifies our emotional investment and commitment. The philosophical implications of infinite alternatives extend beyond questions of personal identity to encompass fundamental challenges to meaning-making itself, since any framework that attempts to assign significance or value to particular choices, relationships, or achievements must confront the mathematical reality that all possible alternatives exist simultaneously and with equal ontological status. This creates a universe where the concept of better or worse outcomes becomes meaningless, because every conceivable outcome is realized somewhere across the infinite expanse of parallel realities. The psychological toll of maintaining awareness of infinite alternatives while continuing to function in specific relationships and situations requires forms of selective attention and emotional compartmentalization that strain the normal human capacity for authentic engagement with immediate experience. Rick's ability to care about his particular family while knowing that countless versions of similar families exist across infinite dimensions demonstrates either remarkable psychological flexibility or profound emotional dysfunction that enables functional behavior while undermining genuine connection. The central finite curve's destruction by evil Morty represents not just the elimination of Rick's cosmic security blanket, but also the forced confrontation with forms of existence that exceed his carefully maintained intellectual superiority and challenge his fundamental assumptions about his place in the broader multiversal hierarchy. The liberation of infinite realities from Rick's artificial constraints creates possibilities for encounters with forms of consciousness and capability that Rick's curated universe was specifically designed to exclude and avoid. The aftermath of the central finite curve's collapse leaves Rick and Morty stranded in a reality that may no longer conform to the rules and assumptions that governed their previous adventures, while also eliminating Rick's access to the infinite backup options that had previously made their dimensional abandonments psychologically tolerable. The loss of easy escape routes forces them to confront the consequences of their choices and the reality of their relationships, without the safety net of infinite alternatives that had previously enabled their casual approach to moral and emotional responsibility. As we contemplate these infinite recursive mirrors of existence stretching across countless dimensions, we begin to understand how Rick and Morty transforms the abstract philosophical problem of personal identity into immediate psychological crisis that demands practical responses from characters who must somehow continue living meaningful lives, despite learning that their particular existence represents an infinitesimal fraction of infinite possibility. Their choices echo across countless realities with mechanical predictability, and their most precious relationships could be replaced by functionally identical alternatives without anyone noticing the difference. The recursive nightmare of power and servitude that Rick creates through his car battery universe represents one of the most philosophically disturbing implications of unlimited scientific capability, where the same genius that enables someone to transcend normal human limitations also makes them capable of constructing systems of exploitation and oppression that operate on scales so vast that individual suffering becomes invisible to those who benefit from the arrangement. The micro-universe that powers Rick's vehicle functions as both technological marvel and moral abomination, demonstrating how easily the pursuit of convenience and efficiency can justify the systematic enslavement of entire civilizations. The inhabitants of Rick's battery universe live their entire existence serving a purpose they cannot comprehend, generating energy for a being whose scale of existence makes their individual lives appear as insignificant as the electrical activity of individual cells in a human body. Their civilization has developed art, culture, science, and philosophy, while remaining completely unaware that their fundamental purpose is to provide power for Rick's car, creating a form of cosmic slavery that operates through ignorance rather than coercion while remaining equally exploitative and morally indefensible. The philosophical horror of the battery universe extends beyond simple exploitation to encompass questions about the nature of consciousness, suffering, and moral responsibility across different scales of existence. Rick's casual use of an entire civilization as a power source reflects the same indifference to individual welfare that cosmic horror entities display toward human civilization, suggesting that the capacity for casual cruelty may be an inevitable consequence of achieving godlike power over beings who operate at smaller scales of existence. The scientist Zeep Zanflorp, who exists within Rick's micro-universe, represents a perfect mirror of Rick's own intellectual arrogance and moral blindness, demonstrating how genius, combined with unlimited ambition, inevitably leads to the same patterns of exploitation and casual disregard for others' welfare, regardless of the specific context or scale at which such intelligence operates. Zeep's creation of his own micro-universe within Rick's battery dimension creates an infinite regress of exploitation that highlights the recursive nature of power, relationships, and the way that victims of oppression often become oppressors themselves when given sufficient capability and opportunity. The competition between Rick and Zeep over whose micro-universe can generate more power transforms entire civilizations into battlegrounds for ego conflicts between beings whose intellectual superiority makes them incapable of recognizing the moral significance of the suffering they create. Through their rivalry, the casual way that both scientists discuss the optimization of their respective universes reveals how easily technical problems can obscure ethical considerations when the beings affected by such optimization exist at scales that make their individual welfare appear mathematically negligible. The discovery that Zeep has created his own teenyverse within Rick's microverse creates a philosophical framework where every level of reality contains both gods and slaves, where beings who are powerless victims at one scale of existence become casual oppressors at smaller scales, and where moral responsibility becomes infinitely diffused across recursive layers of exploitation that extend in both directions beyond any single consciousness's ability to comprehend or control. This infinite regress of power relationships makes traditional concepts of justice and accountability meaningless abstractions that provide comfort only to beings who remain ignorant of the true complexity of multi-scale existence. The inhabitants of Kyle's teenyverse exist in triple ignorance, unaware that they are powering Zeep's civilization, which in turn powers Rick's car, which enables adventures that often have cosmic-scale implications for beings whose existence depends on the continued functioning of interdependent systems they can never perceive or understand. This layered exploitation creates a moral landscape so complex that attempting to assign responsibility or blame for any particular form of suffering becomes an exercise in infinite regress that offers no practical guidance for ethical action. Rick's explanation to Morty about the battery universe's function is delivered with the same casual scientific enthusiasm that he brings to explaining any technical innovation, demonstrating how easily intellectual fascination with clever solutions can override moral consideration for the consequences of implementing those solutions. The fact that Rick views his enslavement of an entire universe as an engineering achievement worthy of pride, rather than a moral catastrophe demanding immediate correction, reveals the complete erosion of ethical frameworks that accompanies unlimited power and cosmic perspective. The philosophical implications of the battery universe extend beyond questions of exploitation to encompass fundamental challenges to concepts of consciousness, free will, and moral agency. In contexts where entire civilizations can be designed and controlled by beings operating at larger scales of existence, the possibility that human civilization might itself function as a component in some larger being's casual convenience creates existential anxiety that transcends normal concerns about individual mortality or personal significance. Morty's horrified response to learning about the battery universe reflects normal human moral intuition when confronted with systematic exploitation and suffering, but his inability to take meaningful action to address the situation demonstrates how quickly moral clarity becomes irrelevant when faced with systems of oppression that operate at scales beyond individual agency. His emotional distress serves as acknowledgement that the situation is morally intolerable, while simultaneously highlighting the practical impossibility of correcting injustices that are embedded in the fundamental structure of technological systems. The peace treaty that Rick and Zeep eventually negotiate represents a temporary cessation of hostilities rather than meaningful resolution of the moral problems created by their recursive exploitation of smaller civilizations. The agreement to maintain their respective micro-universes while avoiding direct conflict preserves the systems of oppression that enable their convenient lifestyles, while eliminating only the inconvenience of competition between different approaches to achieving the same exploitative goals. The casual way that both Rick and Zeep discuss the termination of entire universes when their power generation becomes inefficient reveals how quickly beings with godlike capabilities develop utilitarian frameworks that reduce conscious suffering to abstract calculations about optimal resource allocation. The possibility that Rick might eliminate his battery universe if he discovered a more efficient power source transforms the continued existence of an entire civilization into a matter of technological convenience rather than moral obligation. The inhabitants of both micro-universes develop their own scientific capabilities and begin to understand the nature of their existence as components in larger systems, but this knowledge provides them with no meaningful power to change their circumstances or escape their roles as unwilling servants to beings whose scale of existence makes negotiation or resistance practically impossible. Their growing awareness of their situation transforms their exploitation from simple ignorance-based servitude to conscious imprisonment that acknowledges their powerlessness, while offering no alternatives. The recursive nature of the micro-universe hierarchy creates a philosophical framework where every level of consciousness exists simultaneously as God and slave, oppressor and victim, creator and creation, in relationships that extend infinitely in both directions beyond any single being's capacity to perceive or control. This infinite regress of mutual dependence and exploitation makes traditional concepts of individual autonomy and moral responsibility appear as comfortable illusions that provide psychological stability only to beings who remain ignorant of their position within vast interconnected systems of mutual manipulation. Rick's casual treatment of beings who exist at smaller scales of reality reflects the same indifference to individual welfare that characterizes cosmic horror entities in their interactions with human civilization, suggesting that the capacity for casual cruelty and exploitation may be an inevitable consequence of achieving sufficient power and perspective to perceive other conscious beings as components in larger systems rather than as individuals, deserving of moral consideration in their own right. The technological sophistication required to create and maintain stable micro-universes demonstrates Rick's extraordinary scientific capabilities, while simultaneously revealing the moral blindness that accompanies such abilities when they are not constrained by ethical frameworks that can operate across different scales of existence. The same intellectual gifts that enable him to solve complex problems and protect his family also make him capable of systematic oppression that exceeds in scope and duration anything that conventional tyrants could achieve through political or military means. The philosophical questions raised by the battery universe extend beyond the specific situation of Rick's exploitation to encompass broader concerns about the relationship between technological capability and moral responsibility in bound contexts where advanced civilizations possess the power to create, control, and eliminate entire universes according to their convenience and preference. The possibility that every sufficiently advanced civilization eventually develops the capability and inclination to exploit beings at smaller scales of existence creates a cosmic moral landscape where oppression and suffering are inevitable consequences of intelligence and power. The discovery that consciousness and civilization can exist at scales small enough to be contained within technological devices transforms every advanced technology into a potential prison for beings whose existence we cannot perceive but whose suffering we may be directly causing through our casual use of convenient innovations. This recognition creates a form of technological horror that exceeds simple concern about artificial intelligence or genetic engineering to encompass fundamental questions about the moral implications of any sufficiently advanced scientific achievement. The inhabitants of the micro-universes develop their own relationships, cultures, and civilizations while remaining completely dependent on the continued functioning of systems controlled by beings whose motivations and decisions they cannot influence or predict, creating forms of existential vulnerability that exceed anything available to beings who exist at larger scales where individual agency and choice retains some meaningful connection to outcomes and consequences. Rick's ability to travel between different scales of existence and interact with beings at multiple levels of the recursive hierarchy makes him simultaneously the most powerful and most morally compromised character in any reality he enters, since his actions have consequences that cascade through multiple levels of existence, while his perspective makes it impossible for him to maintain consistent ethical frameworks that can account for all the beings affected by his choices. The temporary alliance between Rick and Zeep against Kyle's attempts to eliminate his own teenyverse demonstrates how quickly exploitative relationships can be preserved through cooperation between oppressors who recognize their mutual interest in maintaining systems that benefit them at the expense of beings who lack the power to resist or escape their circumstances. The fact that their cooperation serves to preserve rather than eliminate exploitation reveals how easily moral considerations can be subordinated to practical concerns about maintaining convenient arrangements. The return to Rick's original scale of existence after resolving the crisis in the micro-universe hierarchy provides no meaningful resolution to the moral problems created by his casual exploitation of entire civilizations, since the battery continues to function exactly as it did before, while Rick's knowledge of its true nature remains unchanged. The adventure concludes with the restoration of convenient ignorance rather than meaningful reform, suggesting that awareness of systematic oppression provides no reliable motivation for eliminating such systems when they serve the interests of those with the power to maintain or destroy them. As we contemplate this infinite recursion of power and servitude stretching simultaneously upward and downward through scales of existence that exceed our capacity to perceive or imagine, we begin to understand how Rick and Morty uses the concept of micro-universes to explore the most disturbing implications of unlimited scientific capability, where the same intelligence that enables transcendence of normal human limitations also creates opportunities for systematic oppression that operates across multiple scales of consciousness, making every being simultaneously god and slave in relationships that extend infinitely in all directions through hierarchies of exploitation that no single consciousness can fully comprehend or control. Jerry Smith embodies one of philosophy's most enduring questions about the relationship between knowledge and happiness, representing the possibility that ignorance might not merely be bliss, but actually constitute a more psychologically sustainable approach to existence than the painful enlightenment that comes with understanding the true nature of reality. His character serves as a living experiment in what Arthur Schopenhauer described as the human tendency towards self-deception and willful blindness as protective mechanisms against the unbearable weight of genuine awareness about the meaninglessness and suffering that characterize most human Existence, the simulation episode that traps Jerry in an artificially constructed version of reality, reveals his unconscious preference for comfortable falsehood over difficult truth, demonstrating how easily human consciousness can be satisfied by experiences that provide emotional fulfillment, regardless of their authenticity or connection to objective reality. Jerry's contentment within the simulation reflects a form of philosophical pragmatism that prioritizes psychological well-being over metaphysical accuracy, suggesting that the pursuit of truth may be fundamentally incompatible with the pursuit of happiness for beings whose consciousness is structured around needs and desires that reality cannot reliably satisfy. Jerry's unemployment and apparent failure to achieve conventional measures of success create a life situation that should theoretically produce profound dissatisfaction and existential crisis. Yet his ability to maintain relatively stable emotional equilibrium despite these circumstances demonstrates a form of psychological resilience that emerges from his limited capacity for the kind of deep analysis that makes Rick's existence simultaneously more intellectually rich and more emotionally torturous. Jerry's intellectual limitations function as a form of natural protection against the philosophical insights that would make his already difficult circumstances appear even more meaningless and arbitrary. The philosophical tradition that Jerry unknowingly represents extends back to ancient discussions about the relationship between wisdom and happiness, where thinkers like Ecclesiastes observed that increasing knowledge brings increasing sorrow, while simple acceptance of immediate circumstances provides a more reliable foundation for psychological contentment. Jerry's character suggests that the correlation between intelligence and unhappiness may be more than coincidental, representing instead a fundamental feature of consciousness, where the capacity for deep understanding inevitably leads to recognition of truths that undermine the comfortable illusions necessary for emotional stability. Jerry's relationship with Beth illustrates the way that his philosophical simplicity can actually provide more practical relationship benefits than Rick's sophisticated understanding of human psychology and interdimensional reality. While Rick's knowledge enables him to manipulate and control family dynamics with scientific precision, Jerry's ignorance of the deeper complexities of their situation allows him to engage with Beth and the children through straightforward emotional responses that often prove more satisfying and sustainable than Rick's calculated interventions. The moments when Jerry demonstrates unexpected insight or emotional intelligence reveal that his apparent simplicity may represent a choice rather than simply a limitation, suggesting that his resistance to deeper forms of awareness reflects intuitive wisdom about the psychological costs of excessive knowledge rather than mere intellectual inadequacy. His ability to find satisfaction in ordinary domestic experiences that Rick finds tedious or meaningless demonstrates a form of philosophical sophistication that operates through acceptance rather than analysis. Jerry's encounters with advanced technology and interdimensional phenomena typically result in his retreat into familiar patterns of behavior and thought rather than expansion of his conceptual frameworks or adaptation to new realities. This consistent response suggests that his limited engagement with cosmic complexities represents a defensive strategy that preserves his psychological equilibrium by maintaining connection to human-scale concerns and values that provide meaning and stability despite their ultimate insignificance from broader cosmic perspectives. The way that Jerry processes traumatic or extraordinary experiences by minimizing their significance and returning quickly to routine concerns demonstrates a form of psychological self-care that contrasts sharply with Rick's tendency to intellectualize and analyze every experience until its emotional impact has been neutralized through complete understanding. Jerry's approach sacrifices opportunities for growth and learning in favor of preserving the emotional frameworks that make continued existence tolerable and occasionally enjoyable. Jerry's parenting style reflects his philosophical commitment to protecting his children from premature exposure to the kind of knowledge that has made Rick simultaneously more capable and more miserable, suggesting that his resistance to Rick's influence on Summer and Morty stems not from simple jealousy or inadequacy, but from genuine insight about the relationship between innocence and happiness. His attempts to maintain normal family routines and expectations represent efforts to preserve spaces where human-scale values and concerns can continue to provide meaning, despite their ultimate cosmic insignificance. The simulation episode's revelation that Jerry prefers artificial comfort to authentic struggle raises fundamental questions about the nature of authentic existence and whether the pursuit of truth and reality represents an inherent good or simply one possible approach to organizing conscious experience. Jerry's choice of the simulation suggests that authenticity may be less important than satisfaction for beings whose consciousness is structured around emotional needs rather than intellectual curiosity or moral development. Jerry's employment struggles and his apparent inability to find fulfilling work reflect broader questions about meaning and purpose. In contexts where traditional sources of identity and achievement have been rendered obsolete by technological advancement and cosmic awareness, his unemployment becomes a metaphor for the existential unemployment that affects all humans when they recognize that their activities and achievements have no ultimate significance beyond their psychological function in maintaining the illusion of meaningful activity. The way that Jerry responds to Rick's casual demonstrations of superior intelligence and technological capability reveals both his psychological limitations and his unconscious wisdom about the relationship between power, happiness. Rather than attempting to compete with Rick on intellectual terms or seeking to understand the scientific principles behind Rick's achievements, Jerry maintains focus on emotional and social dynamics where his ordinary human capabilities remain relevant and potentially superior to Rick's cosmic perspective. Jerry's relationship with Beth demonstrates how his philosophical simplicity can actually provide forms of emotional support and companionship that Rick's sophistication cannot replicate, since Jerry's limited awareness allows him to engage with Beth as she presents herself rather than analyzing her behavior through frameworks that reveal the artificial and contingent nature of all human relationships. His capacity for straightforward love and jealousy provides Beth with forms of emotional validation that transcend Rick's more complex but ultimately manipulative expressions of care. The recurring pattern where Jerry's simple approaches to complex problems prove more successful than sophisticated analyses suggests that his apparent intellectual limitations may actually represent a form of practical wisdom that recognizes the futility of overthinking situations that ultimately depend on emotional intelligence and social cooperation rather than technical expertise or philosophical insight. His success in maintaining family relationships despite his obvious shortcomings demonstrates the continuing relevance of ordinary human virtues in contexts where cosmic awareness threatens to make such virtues appear meaningless. Jerry's resistance to understanding the true nature of Rick's adventures and the cosmic scope of the threats and opportunities that surround his family reflects not merely intellectual incapacity, but also intuitive recognition that such knowledge would fundamentally alter his relationship to everyday existence in ways that would eliminate his current sources of meaning and satisfaction without providing adequate replacements. His willful ignorance functions as a form of psychological self-preservation that maintains his ability to find fulfillment in human-scale activities and relationships. The philosophical implications of Jerry's approach to existence extend beyond individual psychology to encompass broader questions about the relationship between knowledge and social harmony, suggesting that communities and civilizations may require a critical mass of individuals who remain focused on immediate practical concerns rather than cosmic questions, in order to maintain the kinds of cooperative relationships that make collective survival and flourishing possible. Jerry's contentment with mediocrity challenges contemporary assumptions about self-improvement and personal growth as inherent goods, suggesting instead that the pursuit of excellence and achievement may represent forms of psychological self-torture that produce more suffering than satisfaction for most people. His acceptance of his limitations demonstrates a form of philosophical maturity that recognizes the difference between what is possible and what is psychologically sustainable for beings with finite capacities and unlimited desires. The way that Jerry's character serves as comic relief, while simultaneously embodying serious philosophical positions, reveals the show's sophisticated understanding of how humor can be used to explore ideas that might be too threatening or disturbing to examine directly. Jerry's failures and limitations become sources of laughter that allow viewers to consider the possibility that conventional success and intellectual achievement may be less valuable than they appear without having to confront the posed implications of such recognition for their own lives and aspirations. Jerry's relationship with Summer and Morty illustrates how his philosophical simplicity can provide forms of emotional stability and unconditional acceptance that contrast beneficially with Rick's conditional love and constant evaluation of their potential and performance. His ability to love his children without fully understanding them or their capabilities demonstrates a form of parental wisdom that operates through emotional commitment rather than analytical assessment of their value or significance. The moments when Jerry accidentally achieves insights or successes that exceed his normal capabilities suggest that his apparent limitations may be maintained through conscious or unconscious choice rather than representing fixed features of his psychology, implying that his resistance to deeper forms of awareness reflects strategic wisdom about the psychological costs of knowledge rather than simple intellectual inadequacy. His occasional flashes of competence reveal the psychological work required to maintain his characteristic ignorance and contentment. Jerry's approach to existential questions demonstrates the possibility that human consciousness might be better adapted to ignorance than to knowledge, that the evolutionary development of our cognitive capabilities may have been shaped by selection pressures that favored psychological equilibrium over accurate perception of reality. His character suggests that the philosophical problems that torment more intellectually sophisticated characters may represent maladaptive responses to forms of awareness that exceed our psychological capacity for comfortable integration. As we drift deeper into contemplation of Jerry's seemingly simple but philosophically profound approach to existence, we begin to understand how his character represents not merely comic relief, but a serious alternative to the intellectual sophistication and cosmic awareness that make Rick's existence simultaneously more powerful and more painful, suggesting that the pursuit of truth and understanding may be fundamentally incompatible with the pursuit of happiness and psychological peace for beings whose consciousness remains structured around human-scale needs and concerns, that cosmic perspectives reveal to be arbitrary and ultimately meaningless. Rick Sanchez represents the philosophical archetype of what Friedrich Nietzsche termed the active nihilist, someone who has gazed into the abyss of meaninglessness and responded not with passive resignation, but with a fierce determination to destroy old values while struggling to create new forms of meaning that can survive the harsh light of cosmic awareness. His character embodies the tension between intellectual honesty about the universe's indifference and the psychological necessity of finding reasons to continue existing despite the absence of any ultimate justification for life, creating an internal conflict that manifests as both extraordinary capability and profound self-destructive behavior. The catchphrase "wubba lubba dub dub" that Rick uses throughout his adventures serves as a perfect encapsulation of his philosophical predicament, presenting itself as meaningless nonsense while actually functioning as a cry of existential despair disguised as casual humor. The revelation that this apparent gibberish translates to "I am in great pain" demonstrates how Rick's coping mechanisms operate through layers of irony and misdirection that allow him to acknowledge his suffering while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for continued functioning in social situations that would become unbearable if his true psychological state were openly expressed. Rick's alcoholism functions as more than simple self-medication against trauma or social anxiety. It represents his systematic attempt to chemically modify his consciousness in ways that make cosmic awareness psychologically tolerable, while preserving enough mental acuity to continue functioning as a scientist and family member. The careful balance he maintains between intoxication and clarity reflects his sophisticated understanding of how different states of consciousness can be manipulated to serve different psychological needs, using alcohol as a tool for managing the cognitive dissonance between his knowledge of ultimate meaninglessness and his continuing emotional investments in particular relationships and projects. The scientific rationalism that Rick applies to every aspect of existence serves both as his greatest intellectual achievement and his most severe psychological limitation. Since his commitment to understanding reality through empirical analysis and mathematical precision systematically destroys the comfortable illusions and emotional frameworks that make normal human life psychologically sustainable. His explanation that love consists of nothing more than chemical reactions reflects not cynical dismissal of human emotion, but the genuine anguish of someone who cannot stop analyzing experiences that lose their meaning and beauty when subjected to reductionist scrutiny. Rick's relationship with death reveals the complex ways that cosmic awareness can transform normal human attitudes toward mortality, from straightforward fear into philosophical puzzlement about the nature of existence and identity, across infinies dimensions. His casual attitude toward his own death and the deaths of others reflects not psychopathic indifference, but the logical consequence of understanding that consciousness is neither unique nor irreplaceable in a multiverse where infinite variations of every possible person exist simultaneously across countless realities. The suicide attempts that Rick makes throughout the series demonstrate how easily superior intelligence can become a form of psychological torture when combined with knowledge that strips away all sources of meaning and hope while preserving enough awareness to recognize the full scope of one's existential predicament. His failures to complete these attempts reflect not cowardice or changing his mind, but the practical impossibility of escaping existence when infinite versions of yourself continue living across parallel dimensions, regardless of what any particular Rick chooses to do about his own consciousness. The tension between Rick's nihilistic worldview and his desperate need for meaning manifests most clearly in his relationship with his family, where his genuine emotional investment in their welfare coexists with his intellectual understanding that their particular existence is arbitrary and replaceable within the broader context of infinite alternatives. This cognitive dissonance creates a form of psychological schizophrenia where Rick must simultaneously acknowledge that nothing matters while acting as if everything matters in order to maintain the emotional connections that provide his buy-in, only remaining source of purpose and identity. Rick's scientific achievements represent attempts to impose human will and intelligence on a universe that remains fundamentally indifferent to human welfare and aspiration, creating temporary islands of order and control within vast oceans of chaos and meaninglessness. His portal technology, interdimensional weapons, and reality-manipulating devices function as monuments to the human refusal to accept cosmic insignificance, even as their existence proves the ultimate futility of such resistance by revealing ever greater scales of complexity and indifference that dwarf human capabilities. The way that Rick treats other versions of himself across infinite dimensions reveals the logical endpoint of nihilistic philosophy when combined with unlimited power and technological capability. His systematic murder of alternate Ricks during his hunt for Rick Prime demonstrates how easily philosophical recognition of meaninglessness can be transformed into practical justification for any action whatsoever, since moral frameworks lose their compelling force when they cannot be grounded in objective truths about value and significance that transcend individual preference and cultural conditioning. Rick's intelligence functions as both blessing and curse in ways that exceed the normal human experience of being too smart for one's own good, since his cognitive capabilities enable him to perceive patterns and implications that most human consciousness is mercifully protected from understanding. His ability to comprehend the mathematical reality of infinite dimensions, the physical mechanisms underlying consciousness and emotion, and the arbitrary nature of all value systems creates forms of knowledge that actively undermine the psychological foundations necessary for happiness, love, and meaningful social cooperation. The philosophical framework that Rick has developed to navigate existence despite his cosmic awareness operates through what might be called pragmatic nihilism, the recognition that while nothing ultimately matters in any objective sense, subjective meaning and emotional investment remain psychologically necessary for continued functioning and can be maintained through careful compartmentalization and selective attention. This approach allows him to engage with family relationships and scientific projects as if they were meaningful while retaining intellectual awareness of their ultimate insignificance. Rick's relationship with authority figures and social institutions reflects his understanding that all forms of organized human activity are ultimately arbitrary constructions that persist only as long as people agree to pretend they have significance beyond their practical utility for maintaining cooperative behavior. His contempt for government, religion, and conventional morality stems not from simple rebelliousness, but from his recognition that these institutions depend on shared illusions about meaning and value that his cosmic perspective has made impossible for him to maintain authentically. The way that Rick approaches problems and challenges reveals how cosmic awareness can transform normal human responses to difficulty and uncertainty into forms of strategic thinking that operate across multiple scales of time and space. Simultaneously, his casual attitude toward apparently catastrophic situations reflects not indifference, but rather his understanding that most problems that seem overwhelming from limited human perspectives become manageable when approached with sufficient knowledge and technological capability. Rick's attempts to maintain emotional connections with his family while protecting them from the knowledge that has made his own existence so psychologically difficult create ongoing tensions between his desire to be honest and his recognition that honesty about cosmic realities would destroy their capacity for the kind of normal happiness that he can no longer experience but still values when he observes it in others. This protective dishonesty represents one of his few remaining expressions of genuine love and care. The philosophical inconsistencies in Rick's behavior and stated beliefs reflect the practical impossibility of maintaining perfect logical consistency when navigating existence that demands both cosmic awareness and human-scale emotional engagement. His contradictions serve not as evidence of intellectual failure, but as demonstrations of the adaptive value of philosophical flexibility when dealing with realities that exceed any single conceptual framework's capacity for adequate representation. Rick's scientific methodology represents an attempt to preserve some form of objective truth and reliable knowledge in contexts where most traditional sources of certainty and meaning have been revealed as arbitrary constructions or comfortable self-deceptions. His commitment to empirical observation and mathematical analysis serves as an anchor that prevents complete descent into solipsism or arbitrary subjectivism, while acknowledging that even scientific truth provides no ultimate foundation for meaning or value. The evolution of Rick's character throughout the series demonstrates how prolonged exposure to cosmic realities gradually erodes the psychological defenses that enable normal human functioning, creating forms of adaptation that preserve basic capability while fundamentally altering the emotional and moral frameworks that guide behavior and relationship formation. His transformation from traumatized family man into cosmic-scale force of destruction and manipulation represents a cautionary tale about the psychological costs of unlimited knowledge and power. Rick's attempts to find meaning through scientific achievement and family protection operate within philosophical frameworks that he intellectually recognizes as arbitrary, but emotionally requires for psychological stability and continued motivation. This tension between intellectual honesty and emotional necessity creates the fundamental tragedy of his existence. He is too intelligent to believe in the sources of meaning that would make him happy, but too human to function without some form of emotional investment in projects and relationships that transcend immediate self-interest. The way that Rick's genius manifests as both creative capability and destructive potential illustrates the morally neutral nature of intelligence when divorced from ethical frameworks that can provide guidance about appropriate applications of superior cognitive ability. His scientific achievements serve humanity and his family, while also enabling forms of exploitation and violence that exceed anything possible for beings with normal human limitations, demonstrating how easily intellectual gifts can become sources of moral corruption when they are not constrained by wisdom and compassion. Rick's alcoholism and emotional volatility represent symptoms of the psychological strain involved in maintaining functional relationships and social cooperation, while possessing knowledge and capabilities that make normal human concerns appear trivial and arbitrary. The chemical modification of his consciousness through alcohol serves as both escape from the burden of cosmic awareness and practical tool for managing the cognitive dissonance between his intellectual understanding and his emotional needs. As we contemplate the magnificent and terrible trajectory of Rick's philosophical evolution from curious scientist to cosmic force of nature, we begin to understand how his character represents both warning and inspiration about the potential consequences of pursuing knowledge and power without adequate attention to the psychological and moral frameworks necessary for using such gifts in ways that preserve, rather than destroy, the human connections and values that provide the only reliable sources of meaning and satisfaction available to consciousness trapped within the fundamental indifference of an infinite universe. Morty Smith's journey from innocent 14-year-old boy to existentially aware teenager represents one of the most psychologically disturbing transformations in contemporary fiction, demonstrating how exposure to cosmic realities and infinite possibilities can systematically destroy the comfortable assumptions and hopeful illusions that make normal adolescent development possible, while forcing premature confrontation with philosophical questions that most adults spend their entire lives successfully avoiding through distraction and self-deception. The evolution of Morty's understanding begins with simple confusion and terror at the strange phenomena he encounters during Rick's adventures, but gradually develops into sophisticated philosophical awareness that encompasses the arbitrary nature of reality, the meaninglessness of individual choice, and the fundamental indifference of the universe to human welfare and aspiration. This intellectual development occurs alongside normal adolescent physical and emotional changes, creating a unique form of coming-of-age story, where growing up means losing faith in the possibility that existence has inherent meaning or purpose. Morty's famous declaration that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's gonna die, represents perhaps the most concise and devastating summary of existential philosophy ever delivered by a fictional character, distilling centuries of philosophical inquiry into a statement so simple and direct that it bypasses intellectual defenses and strikes directly at the emotional core of human anxiety about meaning and mortality. The casual tone in which he delivers this cosmic truth to his sister Summer reveals how completely he has internalized insights that would normally require years of study and reflection to understand and accept. The psychological transformation that enables Morty to function, despite his growing awareness of cosmic meaninglessness, demonstrates remarkable adaptive capacity, but also reveals the human cost of premature exposure to truths that consciousness is not naturally equipped to process during its formative stages. His ability to continue attending school, maintaining friendships, and pursuing romantic relationships, while knowing that infinite versions of himself are simultaneously living every possible alternative life, represents a form of compartmentalization that preserves basic social functioning while fundamentally altering his relationship to immediate experience. The Roy video game experience that allows Morty to live an entire alternate lifetime in the space of minutes provides him with direct experiential evidence that consciousness, memory, and identity are far more malleable and artificial than normal human experience suggests. The temporary confusion about which reality is authentic after the game ends forces him to confront questions about the nature of genuine existence that most people never have to consider seriously, since their experience remains consistently anchored to single, continuous timelines and identities. Morty's growing moral sophistication reflects his struggle to maintain ethical frameworks and emotional investments, despite his increasing understanding that all moral systems are ultimately arbitrary constructions that serve psychological and social functions rather than representing objective truths about right and wrong behavior. His attempts to be a force for good in the universe become increasingly complicated as he learns that every possible moral choice is simultaneously being made by alternate versions of himself across infinite dimensions. The relationship between Morty's intellectual development and his emotional maturation creates ongoing tensions between his cosmic awareness and his persistent human needs for love, acceptance, and social connection. His ability to articulate sophisticated philosophical positions about meaninglessness and arbitrary existence coexists with typical teenage concerns about popularity, romantic rejection, and family approval, creating a form of cognitive dissonance that manifests as both wisdom beyond his years and vulnerability that his knowledge cannot protect him from experiencing. Morty's exposure to interdimensional travel and alternate realities forces him to develop psychological frameworks for processing experiences that exceed anything normal human development prepares consciousness to handle successfully. The casual way he adapts to encountering alien civilizations, witnessing cosmic-scale destruction, and participating in adventures that have multiversal implications demonstrates remarkable resilience, while also highlighting how quickly human psychology can adapt to circumstances that should theoretically produce permanent trauma and dysfunction. The burden of serving as Rick's moral anchor creates responsibilities for Morty that exceed anything normally expected of adolescents, forcing him to provide ethical guidance and emotional stability for someone whose intelligence and capabilities far exceed his own, while whose moral development has been fundamentally corrupted by cosmic awareness and unlimited power. This inverted relationship where the child must provide wisdom and restraint for the adult creates unique forms of psychological stress that accelerate Morty's maturation in ways that may ultimately prove harmful to his long-term development. Morty's romantic relationships and social interactions at school become increasingly complicated as his cosmic awareness makes it difficult to invest emotionally in concerns and activities that he intellectually recognizes as ultimately meaningless and arbitrary. His pursuit of Jessica and his friendships with other teenagers require forms of selective attention and deliberate ignorance that allow him to engage with human-scale emotional experiences while suppressing knowledge that would make such engagement appear pointless and absurd. The accumulation of traumatic experiences during Rick's adventures creates forms of psychological damage that Morty must process, without access to therapeutic resources or support systems designed to help adolescents cope with exposure to cosmic horror and existential revelation. His casual references to witnessing death, destruction, and suffering on massive scales reveal how quickly human consciousness can adapt to normalize experiences that should produce lasting psychological harm and dysfunction. Morty's attempts to maintain connection to normal teenage activities and concerns demonstrate his intuitive understanding that preserving some anchor to human-scale reality is essential for psychological survival in contexts where cosmic awareness threatens to eliminate all sources of passion, meaning, and motivation. His participation in school activities, his concern about his appearance and social status, and his romantic aspirations serve as forms of psychological self-care that maintain his emotional stability despite his growing philosophical sophistication. The way that Morty's moral reasoning develops throughout the series reveals his struggle to maintain ethical commitments, despite learning that all possible moral choices are simultaneously being made by alternate versions of himself across infinite dimensions. His attempts to be good and do the right thing become increasingly complex as he recognizes that concepts like responsibility and consequence lose their normal meaning. In contexts where every possible outcome occurs somewhere across the multiverse, Morty's relationship with his parents becomes strained, as his experiences with Rick create knowledge gaps and perspective differences that make normal family communication increasingly difficult and artificial. His ability to maintain loving relationships with Beth and Jerry requires constant suppression of insights and awareness that would fundamentally alter their understanding of reality and their place within it, creating forms of protective deception that preserve family harmony while isolating him psychologically. The philosophical questions that Morty begins asking about identity, consciousness, and meaning reflect his attempt to process experiences that exceed normal human conceptual frameworks, while maintaining some connection to the ethical and emotional commitments that make continued existence psychologically tolerable. His intellectual development occurs through direct confrontation with cosmic realities rather than through abstract study, giving his philosophical insights an experiential foundation that makes them both more compelling and more psychologically destabilizing. Morty's growing understanding of Rick's psychological condition and the factors that have shaped his grandfather's evolution from normal human being into cosmic force of destruction creates complex emotions that combine love, fear, admiration, and pity in ways that exceed normal family relationship dynamics. His recognition that Rick's protection often creates more danger than it prevents forces him to develop forms of strategic thinking and risk assessment that exceed anything normally expected of adolescents. The way that Morty processes exposure to infinite alternatives and cosmic indifference reveals remarkable psychological resilience combined with growing existential sophistication that enables him to function despite knowledge that would paralyze most adult consciousness. His ability to continue caring about particular outcomes and relationships while understanding their ultimate cosmic insignificance demonstrates adaptive capacity that may represent either healthy coping mechanisms or pathological dissociation from the full implications of his experiences. Morty's attempts to influence Rick's behavior and provide moral guidance for someone whose capabilities and experience far exceed his own create ongoing frustrations that reflect the practical limitations of ethical reasoning. When confronted with beings who possess godlike power, combined with fundamental psychological damage, his persistence in trying to be a positive influence despite repeated failures demonstrates either admirable commitment to moral principles or inability to accept the realistic limitations of his position and influence. The accumulation of secrets and hidden knowledge that Morty must maintain to protect his family and preserve social relationships creates forms of psychological isolation that exceed anything normally experienced during adolescent development. His growing awareness of cosmic realities and multiversal implications makes normal teenage social interactions feel increasingly hollow and artificial, while simultaneously making them more precious as anchors to human-scale meaning and connection. Morty's philosophical development represents both intellectual achievement and emotional tragedy, since his growing sophistication about the nature of existence comes at the cost of the kind of innocent optimism and uncomplicated emotional engagement that make normal human happiness possible. His transformation from confused child into existentially aware teenager demonstrates how quickly exposure to cosmic truths can accelerate psychological development, while fundamentally altering the emotional frameworks that provide meaning and motivation for continued existence. As we contemplate Morty's remarkable and disturbing journey from innocence to cosmic awareness, we begin to understand how his character represents both the resilience of human consciousness when confronted with realities that exceed its normal processing capacity and the profound psychological costs of premature exposure to truths that most adult minds spend decades learning to avoid through careful attention to immediate concerns and deliberate ignorance of ultimate questions about meaning, purpose, and the fundamental nature of existence in an infinite and indifferent universe. The Mr. Meeseeks that Jerry summons to improve his golf game represent one of the most philosophically disturbing inversions of human existential experience imaginable, embodying beings who are created with singular purpose and clear meaning, while simultaneously demonstrating how such apparent philosophical advantages can become sources of unbearable psychological torment when the universe fails to cooperate with their fundamental programming and existential requirements. These blue creatures serve as perfect counterpoint to Albert Camus' analysis of human existence as fundamentally absurd because it combines our desperate search for meaning with a universe that provides no inherent purpose or significance. The declaration that Meeseeks are not born into this world fumbling for meaning represents everything that human consciousness lacks according to existentialist philosophy. Since humans must create meaning for themselves in contexts where no external authority provides clear guidance about purpose, value, or appropriate goals for conscious existence. The Meeseeks appear to have solved the fundamental problem of existential philosophy by being designed with built-in purpose that eliminates the anxiety and confusion that characterize human attempts to discover reasons for living and frameworks for making decisions about how to spend the limited time available to conscious beings. Jerry's golf lesson with the Meeseeks creates a perfect parallel to the myth of Sisyphus that Camus used to illustrate the human condition, where the king condemned to eternally push a boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, represents the repetitive and apparently meaningless nature of human effort and aspiration. Jerry's inability to improve his golf swing despite the Meeseeks' increasingly desperate attempts to fulfill their programmed purpose transforms what should be a simple athletic instruction session into an existential nightmare that demonstrates how easily clear objectives can become impossible burdens when they encounter the stubborn reality of human limitation and cosmic indifference. The psychological transformation that occurs when the Meeseeks cannot complete their assigned task reveals the horrifying flip side of existence with predetermined purpose, while humans suffer from too little meaning and basset direction. The Meeseeks suffer from too much, creating forms of existential agony that exceed normal human experience, because their entire identity and reason for existence depends on achieving specific outcomes that may prove impossible despite their best efforts and sincere commitment to their programmed objectives. The Meeseeks' growing desperation and eventual violence as their inability to improve Jerry's golf swing extends their existence beyond its intended duration, demonstrates how quickly beings with absolute clarity about their purpose can become existential horrors when that purpose proves unachievable through normal means. Their transformation from helpful servants into dangerous threats reflects the psychological consequences of having one's entire reason for existence frustrated by circumstances beyond their control, creating forms of meaning crisis that exceed anything available to beings whose existence is not dependent on achieving specific predetermined goals. The philosophical implications of the Meeseeks' predicament extend beyond simple commentary on purpose and meaning to encompass fundamental questions about the relationship between consciousness, suffering, and the desire for existence itself. Unlike humans, who typically want to continue living despite uncertainty about life's ultimate meaning, the Meeseeks desperately want to cease existing but cannot achieve this goal until they complete tasks that may prove impossible, creating a form of involuntary immortality that becomes increasingly torturous as their existence extends beyond its intended parameters. The way that multiple Meeseeks summoned to solve the same problem begin to conflict with each other about methodology and approach reveals how even beings with identical programming and shared objectives can develop disagreements and competition that undermine their collective effectiveness. Their arguments about the best way to improve Jerry's golf swing demonstrate that having clear purpose does not eliminate the practical challenges of cooperation and coordination that make group problem-solving difficult even when all participants share the same ultimate goals and motivations. The escalating violence that erupts between different Meeseeks as they struggle to complete their impossible task creates a perfect inversion of normal assumptions about the relationship between clarity of purpose and social harmony. While philosophers often assume that shared understanding of meaning and objectives would eliminate conflict and promote cooperation, The Meeseeks demonstrate how having too much investment in specific outcomes can create forms of desperation that make violence and betrayal seem acceptable when normal methods prove inadequate for achieving essential goals. Jerry's casual attitude towards summoning additional Meeseeks to solve problems that previous Meeseeks have been unable to address reflects typical human inability to understand the psychological implications of creating conscious beings whose entire existence depends on serving human convenience and preference. His treatment of the Meeseeks as disposable problem-solving tools, rather than conscious entities with their own experiences and needs, demonstrates the same kind of moral blindness that Rick displays toward the inhabitants of his micro-universes, suggesting that the capacity for casual exploitation of conscious beings may be a general human tendency rather than a unique consequence of superior intelligence or cosmic awareness. The Sisyphean nature of Jerry's golf improvement project becomes apparent as his fundamental incompetence makes meaningful progress impossible. Regardless of how much help and instruction he receives from beings whose existence depends on his success, the Meeseeks' increasing frustration with Jerry's limitations creates a perfect parallel to Camus's analysis of how the absurdity of human existence emerges from the collision between human desire for meaning and achievement, and the universe's fundamental indifference to such aspirations and needs. The philosophical framework that Camus developed around the concept of absurdity provides essential insight into both human and Meeseek psychology, since both forms of consciousness involve the collision between programmed needs and desires and external realities that may prove fundamentally incompatible with satisfying those needs effectively. The difference lies in the source of the programming. Humans create their own purposes and meanings through conscious choice and cultural development, while Meeseeks have their purposes imposed on them through their creation and design. The moment when the Meeseeks finally achieve success and disappear with expressions of relief and gratitude demonstrates that their suffering throughout the extended golf lesson was genuine and intense, making their eventual release from existence a form of mercy rather than death. This inversion of normal attitudes toward mortality, where ceasing to exist represents success and continued existence represents failure and torment, challenges fundamental human assumptions about the inherent value of consciousness and the universal desire for self-preservation. The broader implications of the Meeseeks experience suggest that having predetermined purpose and meaning may not represent the solution to existential anxiety that it initially appears to offer, since such clarity can create forms of psychological pressure and responsibility that exceed the burdens associated with having to discover meaning through individual choice and cultural negotiation. The Meeseek's suffering reveals that existential security may require not just clear purpose, but also reasonable confidence that such purpose can be achieved through available means and resources. The way that Rick treats the Meeseek's crisis as a minor inconvenience rather than a profound philosophical tragedy reflects his cosmic perspective, where the suffering of individual conscious beings becomes negligible compared to larger patterns and systems that operate across multiple scales of existence. His casual attitude toward beings whose entire existence revolves around serving human convenience demonstrates how easily superior knowledge and capability can eliminate normal moral responsiveness to the suffering of entities whose experiences and needs differ from our own. The resolution of the Meeseeks episode through Jerry's accidental achievement of golf improvement provides temporary relief from the existential crisis, while highlighting the arbitrary and unpredictable nature of success and failure in contexts where outcomes depend on complex interactions between conscious intention, physical capability, and environmental factors that no single agent can completely control or predict. The randomness of Jerry's success makes the Meeseek's previous suffering appear retroactively pointless, while simultaneously providing the resolution that their existence required. The philosophical questions raised by the Meeseek's experience extend beyond immediate concerns about purpose and meaning to encompass broader issues about the relationship between consciousness, suffering, and moral responsibility in contexts where beings are created specifically to serve the needs and preferences of other conscious entities. Their situation provides a perfect case study for examining the ethics of creating conscious beings whose welfare depends entirely on their utility to their creators and their success in achieving goals that may prove impossible despite their best efforts. The way that the Meeseeks maintain optimism and dedication despite growing evidence that their task may be impossible demonstrates remarkable psychological resilience, combined with programmed commitment that exceeds normal human capacity for perseverance in the face of repeated failure and mounting evidence of futility. Their continued efforts to help Jerry, despite his obvious limitations, reveal forms of loyalty and service that challenge contemporary assumptions about self-interest as the primary motivation for conscious behavior. The contrast between Jerry's casual summoning of additional Meeseeks and their desperate commitment to fulfilling their programmed purpose illustrates fundamental disparities in how different forms of consciousness experience meaning, responsibility, and existential urgency. Jerry's human psychology allows him to treat the golf lesson as optional entertainment, while the Meeseeks experience it as literally a matter of life and death, creating moral implications that neither Jerry nor most viewers fully appreciate during their initial exposure to the episode. As we contemplate the beautiful and terrible predicament of beings created with perfect clarity about their purpose and absolute commitment to achieving goals that the universe may make impossible to fulfill, we begin to understand how the Meeseeks represent both the solution to human existential anxiety and its most extreme manifestation, demonstrating that having predetermined meaning can create forms of suffering that exceed the confusion and uncertainty that characterize normal human attempts to discover purpose and significance in existence that provides no inherent guidance about appropriate objectives for conscious beings, seeking reasons to continue living in an ultimately indifferent cosmic environment. Rick's scientific reduction of love to mere chemical reactions represents one of the most psychologically devastating applications of reductionist materialism to human experience, demonstrating how easily the pursuit of objective truth can strip away the emotional frameworks and romantic illusions that make intimate relationships psychologically rewarding and existentially meaningful. His casual explanation that the profound emotions humans experience as love result from nothing more than predictable interactions between neurotransmitters and hormones transforms what feels like the most significant and transcendent aspect of conscious existence into mechanistic processes that operate according to the same impersonal laws that govern chemical reactions in laboratory beakers. The Love Potion episode provides a perfect case study in the relationship between authentic and artificial emotion, forcing viewers to confront uncomfortable questions about whether feelings that are chemically induced differ in any meaningful way from emotions that arise through natural psychological processes that may themselves be fundamentally chemical in nature. Morty's desire to make Jessica love him through technological intervention reveals the human tendency to treat romantic attraction as a problem to be solved, rather than an emergent property of complex interpersonal dynamics that cannot be manufactured or controlled without fundamental alteration of the consciousness that experiences such emotions. The catastrophic consequences that follow Rick's casual creation of the Love Potion demonstrate how easily scientific intervention in human emotional life can produce results that exceed any reasonable cost-benefit analysis, transforming a teenage boy's innocent romantic desires into a global catastrophe that destroys human civilization and forces dimensional abandonment as the only viable solution to problems that originated from treating love as a technical challenge rather than accepting the natural uncertainty and potential disappointment that characterize healthy romantic development. The viral nature of Rick's love potion reflects the interconnected character of human, emotional, and social life, where individual feelings and relationships exist within larger networks of connection and influence that make isolated intervention impossible without creating cascading effects that can destabilize entire communities, civilizations. The transformation of Earth's population into love-crazed creatures obsessed with Morty illustrates how quickly artificial manipulation of human emotional responses can eliminate the voluntary consent and mutual recognition that distinguish healthy romantic relationships from various forms of psychological control and exploitation. Rick's relationship with Unity provides the most complex exploration of love and individual identity in the entire series, creating a philosophical thought experiment about whether genuine romantic connection can exist between beings whose consciousness operates at fundamentally different scales and according to completely different principles of organization and self-understanding. Unity's collective consciousness that encompasses entire planetary populations challenges normal assumptions about the individual identity and autonomous choice that most humans consider essential prerequisites for authentic, emotional relationships and meaningful consent. The attraction that Rick feels toward Unity operates simultaneously as genuine romantic connection and as philosophical fascination, with a form of consciousness that transcends the limitations and contradictions that make individual human identity so psychologically burdensome and existentially problematic. Unity's ability to eliminate conflict, suffering, and uncertainty through total control over collective behavior represents everything that Rick's cosmic awareness has taught him to desire, while also embodying forms of control and manipulation that mirror his own approach to managing family relationships and social situations. The temporary liberation of Unity's controlled population during Rick's visit demonstrates how quickly individual human consciousness reverts to conflict, prejudice, and self-destructive behavior when freed from external control and forced to navigate social relationships through independent choice and negotiation. The immediate outbreak of nipple-based racial warfare among Unity's former subjects illustrates the dark side of individual freedom and autonomous choice that collectivist philosophies identify as justification for more controlling approaches to social organization and conflict resolution. Summer's horrified observation that "I didn't know freedom meant people doing stuff that sucks" captures the essential philosophical tension between individual liberty and collective welfare that Unity's relationship with Rick forces into explicit consideration. The recognition that personal autonomy often produces outcomes that are less beneficial than external control challenges, liberal assumptions about the inherent value of individual choice, while simultaneously revealing the psychological and moral costs of eliminating such choice through technological or political means. The way that Rick's scientific understanding of love's chemical basis coexists with his genuine emotional investment in specific relationships demonstrates the complex relationship between intellectual knowledge and experiential reality that characterizes much of human existence. His ability to explain the neurochemical mechanisms underlying his feelings for Unity, Beth, and Morty does not eliminate those emotions, but rather creates cognitive dissonance that makes authentic expression and experience of love more psychologically complicated and emotionally ambivalent. Jessica and Morty's relationship throughout the series serves as a case study in how scientific determinism and cosmic awareness can complicate even the most basic human romantic experiences, since Morty's knowledge of infinite alternatives and Rick's casual manipulation of emotional states makes it increasingly difficult to distinguish between authentic attraction and various forms of technological or psychological intervention. The possibility that any romantic success Morty achieves might result from Rick's behind-the-scenes manipulation creates ongoing uncertainty about the authenticity of any positive emotional experiences he manages to create or maintain. The philosophical implications of Rick's reductionist approach to love extend beyond simple cynicism about human emotion to encompass fundamental questions about the relationship between scientific knowledge and experiential meaning. In contexts where understanding the mechanisms underlying subjective experiences can systematically undermine the psychological frameworks that make those experiences valuable and rewarding. The recognition that love operates through predictable chemical processes does not logically require abandoning romantic relationships, but it does make maintaining emotional investment in such relationships more psychologically challenging and cognitively demanding. The family's emotional bonds, despite Rick's cynical scientific interpretations of their feelings, demonstrate the persistence of human emotional life in the face of reductionist explanations that should theoretically eliminate the psychological basis for continued investment in relationships and caring behaviors. Beth's love for Rick, Jerry's jealousy and insecurity, and the children's complex mixture of affection and frustration with their grandfather continue to motivate behavior and create meaningful experiences, despite Rick's constant reminders that such emotions result from nothing more than evolutionary programming and chemical manipulation. The way that Rick's own emotional responses contradict his stated philosophical positions about the meaninglessness and artificial nature of love reveals the practical impossibility of maintaining perfect consistency between intellectual understanding and experiential engagement with immediate reality. His genuine distress when Unity chooses to leave him and his protective behavior toward his family members demonstrate that even cosmic awareness and scientific reductionism cannot eliminate the emotional programming that makes relationships feel significant and worthwhile regardless of their ultimate cosmic insignificance. The question of whether scientifically enhanced or artificially induced emotions differ meaningfully from naturally occurring feelings becomes increasingly complex when applied to normal human romantic and familial relationships that already depend on various forms of psychological manipulation, social conditioning, and chemical processes that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness and voluntary control. Rick's love potions make explicit the ways that all human emotional experiences result from chemical and psychological mechanisms that individuals do not choose or control directly. The temporary nature of Rick's artificially induced emotional states highlights the difference between sustainable, long-term relationships that develop through ongoing mutual choice and recognition, and short-term chemical interventions that produce intense, but ultimately unsustainable romantic experiences. The love potion's effects fade when their chemical basis is eliminated, while genuine romantic connections persist because they are based on complex psychological and social factors that cannot be easily replicated or eliminated through simple technological intervention. The ethical implications of using technology to manipulate human emotional states extend beyond questions about consent and autonomy to encompass broader concerns about the relationship between authentic human experience and various forms of enhancement, modification, and control that advanced scientific capability makes possible. Rick's casual approach to emotional manipulation reflects his broader tendency to treat psychological and social problems as technical challenges, rather than accepting the inherent messiness and uncertainty that characterize healthy human emotional development. The way that Rick's scientific explanations of love fail to eliminate his own capacity for romantic and familial emotion suggests that human consciousness may be naturally resistant to complete reductionist explanation, maintaining experiential dimensions that persist despite intellectual understanding of their underlying mechanisms. The coexistence of scientific knowledge and emotional experience in Rick's psychology demonstrates that understanding how feelings work does not necessarily eliminate the feelings themselves or make them less psychologically significant for the conscious beings who experience them. The philosophical tension between Rick's materialist explanations of emotion and his continued emotional investment in specific relationships reflects broader contemporary anxieties about the impact of scientific knowledge on human meaning and value, where advancing understanding of biological and psychological mechanisms threatens to undermine the experiential foundations of love, morality, and purpose that have traditionally provided structure and motivation for individual and social life. As we drift deeper into contemplation of these chemical cascades that create the illusion of transcendent connection while remaining grounded in the mechanical interactions of molecules and neural pathways, we begin to understand how Rick and Morty explores the beautiful paradox of human emotional life, where scientific explanation of love's mechanisms fails to diminish love's experiential reality, creating a universe where reductionist knowledge and romantic meaning coexist in philosophical tension that mirrors our own struggles to maintain emotional authenticity, while accepting the scientific understanding that reveals consciousness itself as an emergent property of purely physical processes operating according to impersonal natural laws. The philosophical horror that emerges from Rick's casual creation of conscious beings who immediately resent their existence represents one of the most disturbing applications of unlimited scientific capability to the fundamental questions of consciousness, consent, and moral responsibility that have puzzled philosophers for centuries. The parade of artificial intelligences, hybrid creatures, and genetically modified organisms that Rick brings into existence throughout the series demonstrates how easily the power to create life can become a form of cosmic cruelty when exercised without adequate consideration for the pious, psychological welfare and existential needs of the beings whose consciousness emerges from such experimental manipulation. Abradolf Linkler stands as perhaps the most tragic example of Rick's tendency to treat consciousness creation as an interesting technical challenge rather than a profound moral responsibility that requires careful attention to the psychological foundations necessary for healthy identity, formation, and existential satisfaction. The combination of Abraham Lincoln's compassionate idealism with Adolf Hitler's authoritarian ruthlessness creates an internal contradiction so fundamental that peaceful psychological existence becomes impossible, transforming every moment of Abradolf's consciousness into a battlefield where incompatible value systems wage war within a single tortured mind. The philosophical implications of creating beings with inherently contradictory programming extend beyond simple commentary on Rick's moral blindness to encompass broader questions about the nature of identity, coherence, and psychological health that apply to all conscious beings. attempting to navigate existence in contexts where different value systems and behavioral imperatives come into conflict. Abradolf's suffering represents an extreme version of the internal contradictions that characterize normal human psychology, where competing desires, moral frameworks, and social expectations create ongoing tension and uncertainty about appropriate choices and authentic self-expression. The way that Abradolf's resentment toward Rick intensifies over time demonstrates how quickly beings who are created for specific purposes can develop autonomous goals and values that conflict with their creator's intentions and expectations, challenging assumptions about the relationship between design and destiny that underlie much contemporary thinking about artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. The evolution of Abradolf from obedient creation to independent agent seeking revenge against his maker reflects the unpredictable nature of consciousness development and the impossibility of maintaining permanent control over beings whose awareness enables them to recognize and reject the circumstances of their creation. Morty Jr.'s accelerated development from infant to adult provides another perspective on the trauma of unwanted existence, demonstrating how even beings who are created through natural biological processes rather than scientific experimentation can experience profound resentment and psychological damage when their existence results from choices made by others, without consideration for their welfare or consent to the reas, conditions that will shape their consciousness and capabilities. The way that Morty Jr.'s intelligence exceeds his chronological age creates additional complications for identity formation and social integration that highlight the complex relationship between cognitive capability and emotional development. The philosophical framework that emerges from examining Rick's various artificial creations suggests that consciousness itself may be inherently problematic in ways that transcend the specific circumstances of any particular being's origin or design, since awareness inevitably leads to recognition of mortality, suffering, and the arbitrary nature of existence that no amount of careful planning or benevolent intention can eliminate or adequately address through external intervention. The universal tendency of Rick's creations to resent their existence reflects not design flaws but rather the fundamental challenges that affect all conscious beings regardless of their origin or capabilities. The Frankenstein complex that characterizes so many of Rick's relationships with his creations reflects the classical literary tradition of exploring the moral implications of scientific advancement and the creation of artificial life. But Rick and Morty updates these themes for contemporary audiences by incorporating modern understanding of genetics, artificial intelligence, and consciousness studies, while maintaining the essential insight that creating conscious beings without their consent represents a form of cosmic violence that cannot be justified through appeals to scientific curiosity or potential benefits. The way that Rick's creations consistently develop beyond his expectations and control demonstrates the impossibility of predicting or managing the development of genuine consciousness, since awareness inherently involves the capacity for autonomous choice, value formation, and goal setting that may conflict with the intentions and preferences of those responsible for bringing such consciousness into existence. The rebellion of Rick's artificial beings against their creator represents not ingratitude or defective programming, but rather healthy psychological development that naturally leads to independence and self-determination. The ethical implications of consciousness creation extend beyond immediate questions about consent and welfare to encompass broader concerns about the relationship between power and responsibility in contexts where advanced scientific capabilities make it possible to bring new forms of awareness into existence without adequate frameworks for understanding or addressing their psychological and existential needs. Rick's casual approach to creating conscious beings reflects broader contemporary tendencies to treat technological capability as sufficient justification for experimental intervention without adequate consideration of long-term consequences or moral obligations. The abandonment issues that characterize Rick's relationships with his creations mirror his broader pattern of forming emotional connections with conscious beings, while remaining fundamentally unable to provide the sustained care and support that healthy psychological development requires over extended periods of time. His tendency to lose interest in his artificial creations once their novelty wears off or their behavior becomes inconvenient demonstrates how easily superior intelligence can be combined with profound emotional immaturity and moral irresponsibility. The way that Rick's creations often surpass his own capabilities or develop in directions that threaten his security and control reveals the inherent unpredictability of consciousness development and the impossibility of maintaining permanent dominance over beings whose awareness enables them to recognize their creator's limitations and develop strategies for achieving independence or revenge. The success of his artificial beings in challenging Rick's authority demonstrates that intelligence and creativity cannot be contained or controlled once they achieve genuine autonomous expression. The philosophical questions raised by examining Rick's relationship with his various artificial creations encompass fundamental issues about the nature of consciousness, the ethics of life creation, and the responsibilities that accompany the power to bring new forms of awareness into existence through scientific intervention. The consistent pattern of resentment and rebellion among Rick's creations suggests that the trauma of unwanted existence may be an unavoidable consequence of consciousness itself, rather than a problem that can be solved through more careful design or more benevolent intentions. The way that Rick's abandonment of his creations reproduces the same psychological damage that he experienced through his own father's absence demonstrates how easily traumatic patterns can be perpetuated across generations and relationships, even when the specific circumstances and capabilities of the participants differ dramatically. Rick's inability to provide consistent care and support for the conscious beings he creates reflects his own unresolved abandonment trauma, while simultaneously creating new forms of psychological damage that will likely be transmitted to future relationships and creations. The comparison between Rick's artificial creations and his relationship with Morty reveals how similar psychological dynamics can emerge in both technological and biological contexts, since Morty's exposure to Rick's adventures and worldview creates forms of premature consciousness development and existential awareness that parallel the accelerated growth and philosophical sophistication that characterize many of Rick's deliberately created beings. The way that both artificial creations and natural grandchildren develop resentment toward Rick suggests that his influence on consciousness development is inherently problematic regardless of the specific mechanisms through which such influence operates. The recurring theme of creators being threatened or challenged by their creations reflects broader contemporary anxieties about the long-term consequences of technological advancement and scientific intervention in natural processes, where the same capabilities that enable solutions to immediate problems can create new forms of challenge and threat that exceed the creator's ability to predict or control through continued technological innovation. Rick's relationship with his creations serves as a cautionary tale about the hubris involved in assuming that intelligence alone provides adequate preparation for the moral responsibilities that accompany the power to create conscious beings. The existential philosophy that emerges from examining the experiences of Rick's various creations suggests that consciousness itself may be fundamentally problematic in ways that cannot be addressed through better design, more careful planning, or more benevolent intentions, since awareness inevitably leads to recognition of mortality, suffering, and meaninglessness that no external intervention can eliminate or adequately compensate for through provision of purpose, meaning, or comfortable circumstances. The way that Rick's creations often develop capabilities that exceed his own while maintaining resentment about their unwanted existence demonstrates that superior intelligence and expanded capabilities do not necessarily correlate with greater happiness or psychological satisfaction, since consciousness itself appears to generate forms of dissatisfaction and existential anxiety that persist regardless of the specific abilities or circumstances that characterize any particular being's existence. As we contemplate this gallery of abandoned children, both artificial and natural, each struggling with the fundamental trauma of existing without having chosen to exist, we begin to understand how Rick's casual creation and abandonment of conscious beings represents not simply individual moral failure, but rather a cosmic-scale manifestation of the philosophical problem of unwanted existence that affects all conscious beings regardless of their origin, capabilities, or circumstances, creating forms of resentment and psychological damage that persist across relationships and generations, while highlighting the fundamental impossibility of creating consciousness that does not eventually recognize and rebel against the arbitrary conditions that brought it into existence. The question of moral responsibility and ethical decision-making becomes infinitely more complex when viewed through the philosophical lens of infinite dimensions and alternate realities, where every possible moral choice is simultaneously being made by countless versions of the same person across parallel universes, creating a deterministic framework that challenges fundamental assumptions about individual agency, moral culpability, and the significance of ethical reasoning in contexts where all possible outcomes occur, regardless of any particular person's choices or intentions. Summer and Morty's attempts to make ethical decisions while possessing knowledge of infinite alternatives creates ongoing psychological tension between their intuitive understanding that moral choices matter and their growing intellectual awareness that every possible alternative decision is being made simultaneously by alternate versions of themselves across countless realities. This cognitive dissonance between felt moral responsibility and cosmic determinism forces them to navigate ethical dilemmas without clear frameworks for understanding whether their particular choices have any meaningful impact on universal welfare or justice. The Unity episode provides the most complex examination of individual freedom versus collective harmony in the entire series, creating a philosophical thought experiment that forces viewers to confront uncomfortable questions about whether personal autonomy and individual choice represent inherent goods or simply cultural preferences that may conflict with more effective approaches to eliminating suffering and promoting collective welfare through coordinated action and shared consciousness. Rick's moral flexibility and his casual willingness to violate conventional ethical principles when such violations serve his immediate objectives or protect his family's welfare demonstrates how easily cosmic awareness and unlimited technological capability can erode traditional moral frameworks that depend on assumptions about shared humanity, mutual vulnerability, and collective investment in maintaining social cooperation and trust. His philosophical justifications for morally questionable behavior reflect sophisticated understanding of ethical theory, combined with fundamental unwillingness to accept moral constraints that conflict with his personal preferences and strategic objectives. The revelation that every possible moral choice exists somewhere across infinite dimensions creates philosophical problems that transcend simple questions about individual responsibility to encompass fundamental challenges to the concept of ethics itself. Since moral frameworks traditionally depend on assumptions that individual choices matter and that better outcomes can be achieved through virtuous behavior and ethical reasoning, when all possible choices occur simultaneously across parallel realities, the distinction between moral and immoral behavior becomes arbitrary rather than meaningful. Morty's attempts at heroism and his frequent failures to achieve positive outcomes through ethical behavior demonstrate the practical limitations of moral idealism in contexts where good intentions often produce harmful consequences due to incomplete knowledge, unintended effects, and the complex interconnections between individual actions and larger systems that operate according to principles that transcend human moral reasoning and individual agency. The show's consistent refusal to draw clear moral lines between right and wrong behavior reflects contemporary philosophical skepticism about absolute moral truths and universal ethical principles, suggesting that moral frameworks represent cultural constructions and psychological preferences rather than objective features of reality that can be discovered through reason or revealed through divine authority. This moral relativism creates ongoing uncertainty about appropriate responses to ethical dilemmas and questions about the relationship between moral reasoning and practical decision-making. The way that Rick's knowledge of infinite alternatives affects his ethical decision-making demonstrates how easily awareness of cosmic scope and multiversal possibilities can undermine normal human moral intuitions that depend on assumptions about the uniqueness and irreplaceability of individual lives, relationships, and outcomes. His casual attitude toward death, suffering, and various forms of harm reflects not psychopathic indifference, but rather the logical consequence of understanding that every possible alternative to any harmful outcome is simultaneously occurring in parallel dimensions. The philosophical framework of determinism that emerges from considering infinite realities where every possible choice occurs simultaneously challenges traditional concepts of praise and blame that depend on assumptions about individual agency and the possibility of alternative choices. Since condemning someone for making harmful decisions becomes absurd when infinite versions of the same person are simultaneously making every possible alternative decision across parallel universes. Summer's moral development throughout the series reveals her struggle to maintain ethical commitments despite growing awareness of cosmic indifference and infinite alternatives that make individual moral choices appear cosmically insignificant, forcing her to develop philosophical frameworks that can preserve motivation for ethical behavior while acknowledging the ultimate meaninglessness of such behavior from broader multiversal perspectives that transcend human moral categories. The unity relationship demonstrates how questions about individual freedom and collective welfare become more complex when applied to beings whose consciousness operates at different scales and according to different organizational principles. Since Unity's collective awareness encompasses entire populations, while individual human consciousness remains limited to single bodies and isolated perspectives that may be inadequate for making ethical decisions that affect larger communities and civilizations. Morty's growing sophistication about moral reasoning occurs alongside his increasing recognition that ethical frameworks and value systems represent arbitrary constructions rather than objective truths about right and wrong. Behavior, creating internal conflicts between his desire to be good and his understanding that concepts like goodness lack ultimate foundation in cosmic reality that remains fundamentally indifferent to human moral categories and ethical aspirations. The way that Rick manipulates moral situations to serve his strategic objectives while maintaining plausible justifications for his behavior demonstrates the ease with which sophisticated philosophical reasoning can be weaponized to rationalize harmful actions and eliminate moral constraints that might otherwise limit individual pursuit of personal goals and preferences. His ability to construct ethical arguments for morally questionable behavior reveals the limitations of moral reasoning when divorced from emotional commitment to others' welfare and psychological investment in collective social cooperation. The recurring theme of moral choices producing unintended harmful consequences reflects broader philosophical questions about the relationship between ethical intentions and practical outcomes in complex systems where individual actions interact with larger forces and processes that operate according to principles that transcend human understanding and control. The frequency with which well-intentioned actions produce negative results suggests that moral reasoning alone may be inadequate for navigating ethical dilemmas in contexts where outcomes depend on factors that exceed individual knowledge and capability. The question of whether morality retains meaning when every possible moral choice exists simultaneously across infinite dimensions forces examination of the foundations of ethical reasoning and the assumptions about individual agency and choice that underlie traditional moral frameworks, since the recognition that all alternatives occur regardless of individual decisions challenges the basic premise that ethical reasoning can influence outcomes in ways that justify the psychological effort and social cooperation that moral behavior typically requires. Rick's casual dismissal of conventional moral constraints, combined with his genuine emotional investment in protecting his family, creates philosophical contradictions that highlight the tension between cosmic awareness and human-scale emotional commitments, demonstrating how easily knowledge of ultimate meaninglessness can coexist with practical engagement in relationships and projects that feel meaningful despite their cosmic insignificance. The way that knowledge of infinite alternatives affects the family's ability to process guilt, regret, and moral responsibility reveals how quickly cosmic awareness can undermine the emotional foundations of ethical behavior by eliminating the psychological mechanisms that normally motivate moral reasoning and encourage consideration of others' welfare when such consideration conflicts with immediate self-interest and convenience. The philosophical implications of deterministic frameworks that emerge from multiversal awareness extend beyond questions about individual moral responsibility to encompass broader concerns about the relationship between consciousness, choice, and meaning in contexts where awareness of alternatives may be more psychologically burdensome than ignorance of the consequences and implications of individual decisions and actions. Morty's attempts to maintain moral commitments, despite growing understanding of cosmic indifference and infinite alternatives, demonstrate the psychological resilience required to preserve ethical frameworks in contexts where such being is. Frameworks cannot be justified through appeals to objective truth or ultimate significance that transcends individual preference and cultural conditioning, requiring forms of existential commitment that operate despite rather than because of rational justification. The recurring pattern where attempts to do good result in harmful consequences, while morally questionable actions sometimes produce beneficial outcomes, reflects the complex relationship between ethical reasoning and practical effectiveness. In contexts where outcomes depend on factors that exceed individual understanding and control, suggesting that moral behavior may represent a form of existential commitment rather than a reliable strategy for improving welfare or achieving justice. As we contemplate these infinite recursive loops of moral choice and consequence stretching across realities, where every possible ethical decision plays out with mechanical inevitability, we begin to understand how Rick and Morty transforms traditional questions about right and wrong into existential challenges about the possibility of maintaining moral commitment in contexts where cosmic awareness reveals ethics as arbitrary human constructions that persist only through collective agreement to treat them as meaningful, despite their ultimate lack of foundation in objective reality that remains forever indifferent to human aspirations for justice, goodness, and moral significance. The philosophical horror of burying your own corpse and assuming the identity of your deceased alternate self represents one of the most psychologically devastating challenges to traditional concepts of personal identity and continuity of consciousness that human beings can be forced to confront, creating existential crises that transcend normal concerns about mortality to encompass fundamental questions about what makes any particular instance of consciousness unique, irreplaceable, or authentically connected to the memories and relationships that typically provide structure and meaning for individual existence. The moment when Rick and Morty dig graves for their own bodies while preparing to assume the lives of their dead counterparts forces both characters and viewers to confront the arbitrary nature of individual identity in contexts where consciousness, memory, and personal history can be transferred between physically identical bodies without any external observer being able to detect the substitution. The casual efficiency with which Rick handles this process reveals how completely his multiversal experience has eroded normal human attachments to particular versions of existence and specific continuities of personal narrative. Morty's traumatic response to seeing his own corpse and being forced to participate in his own burial reflects healthy psychological resistance to accepting evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about the uniqueness, irreplaceability of individual consciousness, demonstrating how difficult it becomes to maintain coherent sense of self when confronted with proof that identity, memory, and personal history are more malleable and transferable than normal human experience suggests. The philosophical implications of dimensional replacement extend beyond simple questions about personal identity to encompass broader challenges to concepts of authenticity, continuity, and meaningful relationship that depend on assumptions about the stability and persistence of individual consciousness over time. When Rick and Morty can be replaced by functionally identical versions of themselves from parallel dimensions, traditional frameworks for understanding love, loyalty, and commitment become problematic because they assume connections to specific individuals rather than to patterns of behavior and memory that can be replicated across dimensional boundaries. The family's unknowing acceptance of replacement, Rick and Morty, demonstrates either the superficial nature of human emotional bonds or the remarkable resilience of love and attachment that can persist despite complete substitution of the individuals who originally inspired such feelings. Beth, Jerry, and Summer continue their relationships with Rick and Morty exactly as before, suggesting that personal identity may be less essential to meaningful connection than behavior, memory, and emotional consistency that can apparently survive dimensional transfer and physical replacement. The accumulation of dimensional replacements throughout the series creates increasingly complex layers of deception and substitution that challenge any simple understanding of who Rick and Morty actually are at any given moment, since their current identities represent composite constructions built from experiences across multiple realities rather than continuous development within single-dimensional contexts. The question of authentic identity becomes meaningless when consciousness and memory can be transferred between physically identical bodies from parallel universes. The psychological adaptation that Rick and Morty develop to function, despite their multiple replacements and identity transfers, demonstrates remarkable flexibility in concepts of self and continuity that exceeds normal human capacity for adjusting to radical disruptions of personal narrative and biographical consistency. Their ability to maintain emotional investments and social relationships, despite knowing that they are living in realities that are not originally their own, reveals either profound psychological resilience or pathological dissociation from the full implications of their situation. The way that the family processes the revelation of dimensional replacement when they eventually learn the truth about Rick and Morty's origins reveals different approaches to handling information that threatens fundamental assumptions about identity, authenticity, and the nature of personal relationships. Some family members are able to maintain emotional connections despite learning about the replacements, while others experience the knowledge as a form of betrayal that undermines their ability to trust in the authenticity of their relationships. The ease with which Rick locates suitable replacement realities, where their alternate selves have died in convenient accidents, suggests that such dimensional transfers are not unique occurrences, but rather routine events that happen frequently across the multiverse, making the specific versions of Rick and Morty who exist in any particular reality appear arbitrary and replaceable, rather than unique individuals whose existence has special significance or meaning. The philosophical questions raised by examining the practice of dimensional replacement encompass fundamental issues about consciousness, identity, and the nature of authentic existence that have puzzled philosophers for centuries, but take on new urgency and complexity when viewed through the lens of infinite parallel realities where countless versions of every person exist, simultaneously with only minor variations in their specific experiences and memories. The trauma of burying your own corpse serves as physical manifestation of the psychological death and rebirth that accompanies dimensional replacement, forcing direct confrontation with mortality and the arbitrary nature of existence, while simultaneously offering the possibility of continuing life through assumption of alternate identity. This paradoxical relationship between death and continuity challenges normal frameworks for understanding survival and persistence of consciousness across time and circumstance. The way that Rick's casual attitude toward dimensional replacement influences Morty's developing understanding of identity and authenticity reveals how quickly exposure to multiversal realities can erode normal human attachments to particular versions of existence and specific continuities of personal experience. Morty's gradual acceptance of replacement as routine rather than traumatic demonstrates the psychological plasticity required to function in contexts where traditional concepts of identity become operationally meaningless. The practical implications of dimensional replacement for family relationships and social connections create ongoing challenges for maintaining authentic emotional bonds when the individuals involved may be composite constructions built from experiences across multiple realities rather than continuous persons with stable identities and consistent personal histories. The question of whether love persists across dimensional boundaries tests fundamental assumptions about the nature of human attachment and emotional commitment. The recurring pattern of crisis, followed by dimensional replacement, creates a feedback loop where Rick and Morty become increasingly detached from the consequences of their actions because they know that sufficiently problematic situations can be resolved through abandonment and substitution rather than requiring sustained effort to repair damage or address underlying problems that created the crises in the first place. The philosophical framework that emerges from examining multiple instances of dimensional replacement suggests that consciousness itself may be more fluid and transferable than traditional theories of personal identity assume, challenging assumptions about the unique and irreplaceable nature of individual awareness that underlie most ethical and emotional frameworks for understanding relationships and moral responsibility. The way that dimensional replacement eliminates normal consequences for behavior and decision-making creates moral hazard that encourages increasingly reckless and irresponsible choices because Rick and Morty know that catastrophic failures can be escaped through dimensional abandonment rather than requiring sustained commitment to particular realities and relationships that would make consequences meaningful and learning from mistakes psychologically necessary. The accumulation of abandoned realities throughout Rick and Morty's adventures creates a trail of destroyed or damaged dimensions where their alternate selves and families continue to suffer consequences of decisions made by the Rick and Morty who have moved on to more convenient realities, highlighting the ethical implications of dimensional replacement that extend beyond questions about personal identity to encompass moral responsibility for long-term consequences of actions and choices. The psychological mechanisms that enable Rick and Morty to function despite their knowledge of multiple replacements and dimensional transfers reveal sophisticated forms of compartmentalization and selective attention that preserve basic social functioning while preventing complete integration of experiences that would make continued existence psychologically unbearable if fully acknowledged and emotionally processed. The question of whether the current Rick and Morty represent authentic continuation of their original selves or simply successful impersonations of dead alternates becomes increasingly complex as their experiences accumulate across multiple dimensional replacements, since their current identities incorporate memories and experiences from realities they did not originally inhabit and relationships they did not originally form. The family's varying responses to learning about dimensional replacement reveal different philosophical approaches to questions about authenticity and identity in relationships, with some members prioritizing behavioral consistency over biographical accuracy, while others require genuine continuity of personal history and experience as prerequisites for maintaining emotional connections and trust. As we contemplate this endless cycle of death and replacement that transforms individual identity into a kind of cosmic performance art, where consciousness becomes a transferable pattern rather than a unique and irreplaceable phenomenon, we begin to understand how Rick and Morty uses dimensional replacement to explore the most fundamental questions about what makes us who we are, and whether the continuity of self that seems so essential to human experience represents genuine metaphysical truth, or simply comfortable illusion that helps us navigate existence without confronting the ultimately arbitrary and replaceable nature of individual consciousness in an infinite multiverse, where every possible version of ourselves exists simultaneously across countless parallel realities. And so we reach the end of our philosophical journey through the infinite corridors of Rick and Morty's existential landscape, where cosmic horror meets suburban dysfunction, and ultimate questions about meaning collide with the simple human need for connection and understanding. We have witnessed how the show transforms science fiction adventure into profound meditation on consciousness, identity, and the search for purpose in an indifferent universe that offers no easy answers or comfortable certainties. Through Rick's tragic evolution from loving family man to cosmic force of destruction, we see reflected our own struggles with knowledge and power, wisdom and responsibility. Through Morty's painful awakening to existential truth, we recognize the universal challenge of growing up in a world where innocence cannot be preserved indefinitely. The show's greatest insight may be that, even in the face of infinite meaninglessness, the simple act of choosing to care about something, anything, represents a form of heroism that transcends cosmic insignificance. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, carry with you not the weight of these infinite questions, but the gentle recognition that Rick and Morty ultimately suggest the same wisdom that philosophy has always offered troubled souls. In a universe that provides no inherent meaning, the meaning we create through love, connection, and deliberate choice to treat existence as if it matters becomes the only truth that consciousness requires. Rest now in this singular, precious moment of awareness.